Hey everyone, before we dive into part 2, I just want to give a massive thank you for all the love and support that I received on my first video. At the time of recording this, I have over 4,000 views and just over 100 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much for all the support. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend watching part 1 as I tackle very important topics there that I won't necessarily dive deep into here. It's been incredible to read your comments and all your feedback, and I love seeing how many of you are just as passionate about these topics as I am. I'm excited to keep this conversation going, so let's dive into it. Let's start with something that's actually going right in the gaming world: indie and smaller game studios. While a lot of big AAA publishers often disappoint, most indie developers have been stepping up with innovation and creativity. In the last video, I praised Palworld for scratching an itch we've been waiting years for Pokemon to scratch. That's the power of these smaller studios. They're not tied down by corporate greed. They can take risks and create experiences that truly resonate with the community. We all want to see companies like Nintendo flourish. After all, they gave us so much of our childhood with their iconic games. But here's the problem: they've become the exact thing their games often paint as a villain, a greedy corporate empire stomping on the little guy. Just look at how Nintendo is handling Palworld. Instead of seeing it as healthy competition or even inspiration, they chose to sue the developers over patents that Nintendo only released after Palworld came out. That's corporate greed at its finest. It's not just about competition, it's about creating an environment where creativity can thrive. These indie developers are a beacon of hope in a landscape that can often feel dominated by cookie-cutter sequels and franchise fatigue. Rather than fostering creativity, big corporations are trying to squash it. It's ironic because the developers of Palworld obviously have huge respect for what Nintendo has done in the past. You can see that respect in the same way they crafted a world reminiscent of Pokemon, but with a fresh creative twist. And guns. It's sad to see a company that is so loved by so many people now playing the role of a villain.
A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Now, I want to talk about a sensitive topic: politics in games. Here's the thing. Games are made by humans, and humans have worldviews. So naturally, politics are going to seep into the stories and themes. The issue here isn't whether or not games should tackle political topics. It's how these themes are communicated, and whether they serve the story and gameplay. Spec Ops The Line is a perfect example of how to do it right. For those who don't know what Spec Ops The Line is, I do recommend that you play the game, try it out for yourself. It is one of the most original, thought-provoking games I have ever played. I will be spoiling the game now to bring my point across, so if you really want to play the game and do not want the game spoiled for you, I would recommend jumping to the time as shown on the screen. Spec Ops The Line weaves deep political and moral themes into its gameplay, like the morality of war and the psychological toll of violence. It does this without ever feeling like it is pushing a specific agenda. It doesn't stop the game to lecture you at any point. Instead, it allows you to experience the consequences of your actions firsthand, leaving you to reflect on the emotional and moral weight of your decisions. That's how it should be done. Similarly, Deus Ex Human Revolution tackles topics like transhumanism and corporate greed, but it does it in a way that allows you, the player, to explore these themes on your own terms. The world is complex and your actions influence the outcomes. It's political, yes, but in a way that respects the player's intelligence and choices. On the flip side though, some modern AAA games miss the mark. Take Far Cry 6 for instance. While it clearly aims to tackle issues like authoritarianism and revolution, the way it handles these themes often feels heavy-handed. Instead of letting players experience and interpret the world for themselves, it hammers home its messages in a way that feels disconnected from the player's agency. The narrative loses subtlety, which takes away from immersion. Now, I mentioned player agency, and for those who don't know, player agency is the degree of freedom the developer gives players to chart their own path through the game. The key isn't to avoid political themes at all, it's to weave them into the fabric of the world in a way that respects the player's experience. Games like The Witcher 3 do this brilliantly, where social and political issues like class struggles and prejudice emerge naturally from the story and the world. You're free to make decisions based on your own beliefs without being told what's right or wrong. This empowers players to make their journey feel personal and impactful. There's a lot of videos and a lot of voices out there saying that there's no space for politics in games. I think what a lot of people are saying is there's no space for you to shove your ideologies or your agendas down my throat. And I agree with this. We can share political themes in a very subtle and thought-provoking way without forcing it on a player. And there are a lot of wonderful examples of this out there. As we shift our focus again, let's talk about another frustrating trend in gaming: the growing laziness among developers. It feels like we've reached a point now where it's expected that a major release will always come out buggy, unfinished, or lacking core features, only to be patched over time. This wasn't always the case. Back in the day, games launched on CDs or DVDs as complete products. When you bought a game, you knew it was ready to go right out of the box. There was no expectation that you'd have to wait for a series of patches just to make it playable. Of course, there's always been a place for alphas and betas in gaming, especially for indie developers. These teams are often working with limited resources and smaller budgets, and they genuinely need the feedback from early access players to help refine their game before a full release. In those cases, early builds and community-driven bug testing make sense. Indie games are passion projects, and the devs don't have the luxury of massive QA teams like AAA studios do. The alpha and beta phases serve a valuable purpose for them, allowing gamers to help shape the final product. But when it comes to AAA developers, the biggest studios with the biggest budgets, it's hard to justify the current state of things. These companies have huge teams, enormous financial backing, and years of experience in the industry. Yet more and more, we are seeing them release games that feel unfinished, riddled with bugs, and sometimes completely broken on launch. It's like going to a bakery, buying a loaf of bread, and finding out it's half-baked. Then you're told to come back in a few weeks, a few months, or even a year so the baker can finish cooking it. That's basically what we're dealing with in the gaming world right now, and it's become the norm. Take Cyberpunk 2077 as a prime example. This is one of the most highly anticipated releases of the decade, with CD Projekt Red being a beloved studio after their work with the Witcher series. But when the game launched, it was a disaster on many platforms, especially consoles. Cyberpunk was riddled with glitches, crashes, and performance issues. The game wasn't just buggy, it was borderline unplayable for a large portion of the player base. CD Projekt Red had to issue multiple patches for several months to fix basic functionality, with some of the game's promised features missing entirely at launch. And this wasn't a small indie studio, this was a massive AAA developer that had years to get it right. I am glad for the redemption story that Cyberpunk has now. I thoroughly have enjoyed the game myself. I just wish that it didn't launch in the state that it did. The thing is, we as gamers have come to expect this. We pre-order games knowing full well that they might not be working properly on day one. We accept that the game we paid full price for might not be fully functional until weeks, even months later. This is especially problematic when you consider the fact that many of these games are being sold for $60 or more at launch. Patching and updates have become a safety net for developers to release half-finished games. And while it's true that no games will ever be perfect, especially when it comes to complex systems, it's also true that we've seen a drop in quality control across the board. Bugs that should be caught during testing phase are making it into the final release. And rather than taking the time to polish a game before launch, developers rely on post-launch patches and updates to fix what should have been addressed earlier on. There's no doubt that games have become more and more complex and ambitious over the years, but it doesn't excuse the laziness that's crept into AAA development. When you're charging players top dollar for a game, you have a responsibility to ensure that what you're delivering is as close to finished as possible on launch. Patches should be used for minor adjustments and unforeseen issues, not to fix broken core mechanics or game-breaking bugs that should have been caught during development. As gamers, this is another trend that we've become way too accepting of. We've normalized the idea that buying a game at launch means being a beta tester for a product that should already be complete. This is a shift in the industry that we shouldn't have to tolerate, especially not when we're paying full price for these games. Studios need to take more pride in their work, deliver the polished experience they used to, rather than relying on patches to fix what should have been right in the first place. At the end of the day, early access and unfinished products do have their place, where smaller teams need the extra time and player feedback to refine their game. But when AAA companies are releasing half-baked products, It's not because they don't have the resources or talent. It's because they've learned that they don't have to get it right the first time. As long as gamers keep buying, they can fix things later. And that's a trend that's doing a real disservice to the gaming community. Now I want to talk about something quite crucial. The reason all of these issues exist, from the half-baked games, the lack of innovation, to the increasing presence of cash grab mechanics, comes down to one simple fact. We, the players, vote for the stuff with our wallets. The gaming industry is driven by profits, and as long as these practices are profitable, the major publishers will continue to use them. Let's be honest and real with ourselves. Many of us have bought into these mechanics in the past, whether we have liked them or not. Things like loot crates, battle passes, paid cosmetics, and even DLCs launched on day one have become staples of the AAA gaming industry. We see this across the board, from first-person shooters to sports games. Every time we buy a battle pass, purchase a cosmetic skin, or support a game with these tactics, we're signaling to developers that this business model works. Take EA for example, which pretty much has a monopoly on football games through their FIFA franchise, which is now called EA Sports FC. Despite years of player complaints about aggressive microtransactions, especially in Ultimate Team, the game continues to sell millions of copies annually. Why? Because football fans want to play football games, and there's no real alternative. Even though there's a ton of backlash against EA's decisions, the football gaming community keeps buying into it. And as long as those sales numbers are strong, EA has no reason to change its practices. This applies to so many other franchises as well. Big publishers know that they can introduce cash grab mechanics like microtransactions, and while they get some pushback online, the sales numbers prove that players are still willing to pay. Whether it's a battle pass in a shooter or exclusive cosmetics in a role-playing game, these systems are designed to exploit FOMO and to keep players engaged long after they've bought the game. The focus has shifted from creating an immersive, complete experience to keeping players in a loop of spending and grinding. And honestly, as long as the majority of players keep voting with their wallets, we can't expect anything to change. Sure, people criticize these models, and we have seen waves of outrage when something like a particularly egregious loot box system surfaces, but that outrage often doesn't translate to change. The truth is, these companies are driven by the bottom line, and as long as these mechanics are profitable, they will continue to exploit them. So if we want to see a real shift in the gaming industry, it has to start with us, the players. We have to make more informed choices about where we spend our money and what kind of games and business practices we support. Otherwise, we're just reinforcing the very trends that we're complaining about. If we want polished games, thoughtful character development, and fair, non-exploitative monetization systems, we have to be willing to vote for those with our wallets too. One of the best examples of this has happened recently, with Concord losing on $400 million and having to completely shut their game down. Leading up to the launch of Concord, we saw people online saying, if you don't like it, don't buy it. This proved to both gamers and AAA companies that players hold the power. After saying all this, and I'll end this the same as how I ended the last video, I am very grateful for the current climate of gaming. I'm having a lot of fun lately playing games developed by smaller game studios. There are still some AAA companies that listen to their fans, and it doesn't feel like they're driven by profit more so than wanting to make good games. Maybe they are driven by profit, but they understand that a good game that is loved by many equals more profit, which is something that I do not understand why other AAA companies haven't come to grasp with. I am going to end this video there. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you guys. I'm definitely going to be making more videos going forward. I've discovered something I enjoy and I'm going to just jump on it. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more from this channel, please subscribe below, and I hope you guys have the most amazing day.